Continuing the cycle of our lectures, today we will talk about the politics of the First Republic of Armenia. Last time we talked about the processes taking place in Turkey, especially where these successes came from. We had success or a failure, that's the matter. What was possible to get and what we got in fact? What happened to the Armenian people and the Armenian elite then? I have a clear purpose in this conversation. There's a lot of talk in Armenia about this, that 100 years ago it was the same. When speaking about nowadays, people keep reminding that it was like this also from 1918 until 1920. And in fact, it is constantly trying to identify this condition. A question may arise, thus, what is the meaning of identification? I think it is of great importance because even since the 90s, the processes that have been going on since the 80s, many people have tried to constantly evaluate with precedents. But in reality, in my opinion, was completely different. And this is a rather dangerous approach and has influenced many decisions over the decades that have been taken by the Armenian authorities since the 80s, since 91, at least to this day. I will try to convince you that the years 1918 to 1920 were the years of the creation of the New World Order. However, the processes that began in the 1980s were processes of rejection of the existing world order, which continue to this day. A very significant difference this makes. And if it was not clear in time, it is natural that it would lead to incorrect estimates and decisions. I still see a lot of figures who have been active in the 1990s who assess today's processes like static as an attempt of some strong violation on our part. What was the most important thing at that time? Naturally, historians have presented different points of view, but there are some facts about which no one disputes. I attempted to clarify a few instances in order to better understand the Armenian people's and elites' points of view, how they viewed the situation, how they evaluated it, and what decisions they made. And as a result, what they've got was a lot or a little. Many people today believe that we should have kept things the way or that way or this other way. They say if we had talked to a Russian, talked to a Bolshevik, talked to Turks, it would have been different. We really wanted to do a lot, but we didn't get enough. That's what we need to find out, what we wanted, what we got, what decisions we came to, and what documents we signed. Then it will become clear whether we had any program at all in 1918 until 1920 as a state, or we were just trying to participate in other people's programs. This is a very significant thing, by the way. And we see that Surmalu is also included in the Erivan gubernia or province. It is important to note this and then remember that changes that took place in 1914 until 1918 and then subsequently 1920. This Transcaucasia of that time in 1914, this is what matters. See, Kars was already there, was the same Erivan gubernia, Elizavetapol gubernia, Baku gubernia, and Tiflis gubernia, Kutaisi, Batumi, and so on. In 1914, in the south of Russia, in Transcaucasia, there was such a situation. 1918, a mess, but this blue one shows where the Russian troops had come to. Van, Erzurum, and Trabzon. This is the situation that in 1918 became the arena of struggle. We've talked about it a lot, but I would like to say a very significant thing. What was in the north? This is the south of Russia. This is a modern map. But I'm just showing the territory, just the Black Sea, the Caspian Sea, and Georgia. This border goes like this. Why is it important for us to understand what happened on this territory in the same years of 1918 until 1920? We've gone through everything that happened during the Ottoman Empire in great detail. But it is very interesting what kind of picture this political territory had in the same period. This is a very important factor, without studying which it would be completely incomprehensible how the First Republic of Armenia came to exist. Because here on this blue map, it is clear, the Black Sea coast I'm showing, here on this territory was the power of the White Guard of Russia. The Bolsheviks made a revolution in 1917, but they were in the center, St. Petersburg, Moscow, and other places. This south was in the hands of the White Guard from 1917 to 1920. Since 1917, the volunteer army of the south of Russia had been formed. And this army was in the central city of Yekaterinodar. This city had a unique consultation, which was a form of political elite made up of commanders. And they were the driving power of politics. The army was at war. Later, in 1919, it was renamed the Russian Army's Armed Forces of the South, as the region had already grown. Not a single Bolshevik can enter the current, permanent, entire territory. But it was bordered by Transcaucasia. Now we may go on to one instance from the very beginning when the Bolsheviks in the north and the White Guards in the south clashed in Russia. The main person then was General Denikin. He was appointed first as the commander of this volunteer army, then as the commander of the armed forces of the General Army. In general, Armenia and everyone in Transcaucasia had relations with him. What should Transcaucasia have done in such a state when Russia is in such a position? The war is not over yet. The fight ended in October 1918. It was such a year when the war was going on and Russia was in such a state. Transcaucasian sign was created. At first, in 1917, it was called the Commissariat, February 12, 1918. This date is given by the three nations, mostly separated, joined again. Muslims were separated and were all called Tatars, as well as Armenians and Georgians. National councils were created. These national councils were made of the deputies who previously had been elected in Russia. And so they proclaimed that Transcaucasia is such a united sign. But they immediately fell into the hands of the Ottomans. The Ottomans dictated everything there. Look at what interesting steps were taken and what great importance they had for the Armenian people. On April 22nd, the Ottoman Empire ordered them to become some kind of Transcaucasian Democratic Federal Republic. It must become. They said yes, and he admitted it himself. He wants to create some kind of unit. What was the most important thing then? The relationship between the Ottoman Empire and the Bolsheviks. This is a very significant circumstance that we must understand. March 3, 1918, a peace treaty was concluded in Brest-Litovsk, in which both the Ottoman Empire and Russia participated. And after that, they signed a separate agreement there. There were a number of countries called the Central Countries. Germany, Austria-Hungary, Bulgaria signed it separately. A well-known fact, the agreement with Russia was concluded and Russia withdrew from the war. But the Ottoman Empire again concluded a treaty at that time. In its part, a very significant thing. For its part, it concluded an agreement that Kars, Ardahan, Batum, not to mention the vilayets of Western Armenia, Russia ceded to the Ottoman Empire. You see an essential thing, and already having in its luggage, what does the Ottoman Empire do? Immediately, the war begins on the territory of Western Armenia. Very early, it takes Trabzon, Erzurum, and puts the Transcaucasian Democratic Republic in an ultimatum. The Kars region must be conceded. What were they supposed to do? This sign went to negotiations, and these negotiations were held in Trabzon. They had to go, try to find a way. What did the Ottoman Empire do there? The Sultan demanded that this republic recognizes the Brest-Litovsk Treaty and fulfill all the conditions. This has already concerned both the national councils of Georgia and Armenia. They haven't reached a conclusion yet, but Georgia has understood that it needs to find a solution. In fact, it asked Germany to take the log under the protectorate. They accepted their request. They also had their problems. There are a variety of reasons for this, such as the railway passing through Georgia. I don't know, they didn't want the Ottomans to expand any further, and so on and so forth. This is not an essential thing. The important thing is that it found its place like this. What should Armenia do? Nothing. Kars was handed over. On April 25th, the troops were withdrawn from Armenia because the Sejm, before giving this order, offered the troops to negotiate. But when they went to the negotiations, they were said nothing can be changed and they need to free Kars and then come to negotiations. If we look at this map here, then here along these lines, they give what happened for several months, how the troops were advancing. But the Germans have already decided to take something into their own hands and offered, let's hold a conference in Batumi. While the war is going on, a conference is being held in Batumi, and the famous May battles and the Ottomans, Sardarabad, Bashabaran, Karakilis, they're already strangling the country. The conference is underway, and of course they didn't reach anything. But there's an episode here that we have to stop and study very seriously. What are the republics already doing? And not the republics, but councils, namely of that Transcaucasian Republic. They have already realized that there's no such thing as talking, and in May they're already beginning to declare independence. On May 26th, Georgia declared itself an independent state. In May 27th, the Azerbaijanis then decided, they were called Tatars, to declare independence. They were the one to decide. And Armenians, what are the Armenians doing? They're not proclaiming independence. They read, see how the figures of the time explain. Some say that Russia will come again, it is dangerous, what to do next will be bad. The other part says something different. They don't declare the independence, but they declared a way out. There's no Transcaucasian Republic, and proclaimed themselves the sole supreme authority of the Armenian provinces. And what were these Armenian provinces? On May 30th, against the background of these wars, meetings with representatives of the Ottoman Empire are held in Batumi on the 3rd of June. They demand that Armenia make a commitment that Armenia will never have diplomatic relations with a state at war with the Ottoman Empire. They take the commitment. On this basis, on June 4th, a very well-known Batum peace treaty is signed where borders are marked. See this yellow here? Sevan, around Sevan like this. Armenians accept these conditions. Clearly, those territories that are in the hands of the Armenians. This is Armenia, independent Armenia. And the Ottoman Empire immediately recognizes and declares around the world that they have created Armenia. The Armenian question does not exist. In 3 days or 4 days, the war starts again. Armenia received a signed document, which was then assessed by everyone. There was no influence on the war. The war still continued, but this document, specifically Denikin, assessed that it could not be a state. So let's define how we should treat the states created on the territory. We will work better with Georgia. It will become a state. Armenians will also live there. We will help, we will support. And now we should understand what they pinned their hopes on. Surprising. Then, did they really not put this document into anything? And did they not understand what they were signing? Even today, we need to think deeply about where the Armenian policy began. Still the capital. Only on July 17, 1917, the capital, and not the National Council, which had already established a government in Tiflis, moved from Tiflis somehow, with difficulty, and accepted that no, Yerevan should not be the capital. Already at some point, you imagine that at least this small territory, when you leave Kars, and 20,000 refugees come back from a variety of places. It is impossible to talk about any society. There are good descriptions. Everything was according to their provincial thinking, right? Like the Sasunsi were a group. They said that my child is an Armenian, I don't know, Western Armenians are from another place. It's a people from Karabakh, from another Lori people, whatever. You see, what was happening? Like hunger, chaos, and how to solve this problem. And the government, which you don't know who they are, the parties, there are 3 of 4 parties were National Council, came to create a government. And Kajazuni, with the government, with the people, with the parties, all were in a chaos. And what was done at that time? This thesis is also important, but the critical one is, where did it come from? Our main problem is to deal with the neighbors. That very strategy. Look, there are still a lot of people saying this. There's nothing else we can do. And, of course, he cannot do anything either. But it is interesting that the army, half of which the officers were Russian, and the other Armenians were also Russian officers, and the relations of the people and the government to understand in such a state. When I was talking, I will talk about the Turks again. Now I'm talking about the Turks because we talked about it during self-determination. We already know how they started. In a situation like this, they weren't in the best condition. And when they lost, the situation was almost the same in the Ottoman Empire and in Armenia. The only difference were the scales. But we saw how they started from the people, have created the nation, the people, then the people turned into a council, government, parliament. Such processes have not been observed in Armenia. This is way important. There's no such consciousness that it was necessary to bring a movement out of this ruined situation in order to then have a parliament, a government, and an army subordinate to the political bodies. But what did the Armenians do? What should they have done? I have intentionally mentioned the maps of Denikin's location. The only thing left was to go enter their projects, try to cooperate with them. It was summer already. When the capital came, they tried to contact the Bolsheviks right away in the summer of 1918, but nothing came of it. And even the first few people who went to talk to them were arrested by the Russians and thrown in prison. It's all about Lenin. But Denikin is working. And he was the only factor Armenia could hope for a help. Immediately, Georgia turned into an enemy, and in general, I will talk a little about what positions they had. The Armenians had nowhere else. They had to take out wheat and arms from there. Georgia as well started to make a relationship and was like, you must give half of your bread to me. The same goes for arms. The political course itself, Denikin's army and this political elite, was unacceptable. They did not recognize anyone's independence. Talking to the Armenians, talking to everyone, they said that this is Russia. And it was already difficult, you know? You don't know what to do. No one knows whether they will win, whether Lenin will win, whether Denikin will win. There was a third as well, but he was far in Siberia. Armenians also wanted to talk to them. They wanted to deal with everyone. No one knows, and not only Armenians, they were all at the same situation. And I'll tell you how everyone wanted to understand where this is going. That's the difficulty. Both the Bolsheviks and Denikin's army said that there was no independent territory. There's Russia. Those who tried to do something else had already created problems. That was the hardest part. You don't know what to do. And Armenia was forced to establish relations. And a relationship was established. The summer of 1918, the help came. Thanks to this, they were able to do something. And the second problem, I said, was already the army, because from the very beginning of 1918, the Tsarist army left these territories. I showed how the Ottomans immediately entered. But some of them remained both in Azerbaijan and in Armenia. Where to go? Most of them were the heads of the army. And there are many documents that for a long time the army really obeyed Denikin. There's a well-known order of Denikin who restrained Azerbaijan in 1919. There was such an influence. It was a serious problem. Anyway, we won't go much deeper here. These relations had developed. Armenia could somehow breathe. But hunger, death, the simple, ugly situation. No task of self-determination was set. A society was created. There was no awareness of such things. Just go talk here, go talk there, talk somewhere. That's it. Something will come out. That is, a policy to create these relationships or to talk. That's the basis. No one was in a good situation. I have already said that the Georgians immediately went under the Germans, used the opportunity. Well, the Tatars immediately collaborated with the Ottomans, and then they signed something, made it official. No one relied on themselves. The war ended with the capitulation of the Ottoman Empire. On October 30th, 1918, the capitulation was signed in Mudanya. Mudros, to be particular. And now look what happened. Immediately, the situation was taken into its own hands by Great Britain as the most important country of the Entente. They have already given an order to send troops to the territory of Transcaucasia. Since November, they have already begun to enter. Batum has already taken over. And interestingly, they told Denikin, the volunteer army of Russia, that we came here to keep order and we will fulfill the provisions of the treaty, the peace treaty that was signed. There isn't anything else there. Of course, there are several extremely major things that Britain has done, including one that many people in Armenia erroneously judge. The first of them was the help to the army of the south of Russia to fight the Bolsheviks. Before that, a certain contingent from Persia entered Baku. I'll tell the story short. In Baku, there were Bolsheviks. Shahumyan was there. In the same year, in 1918. And already the continuation of the fights, now I'll show that before the defeat the Ottomans reached Baku. The difficulty of the situation for the Armenians themselves was that there were Bolsheviks in Baku led by Shahumyan. Dashnak army was there. And when the Batumi Treaty I mentioned was signed on June 4th, there was a special clause on the 11th clause that Armenia should enable a road for Ottomans that should lead to Baku. And the Armenian army should be withdrawn from Baku. There was the main army. And when Britain entered the territory in 1918, back in the summer, they immediately went from Persia to Baku. Who were they fighting with? Together with Shahumyan against the Ottoman army. Look at where this is coming from. You can't get which strategy is from whom. But even here, it is clear that the Armenians were just participants. An Armenian participates either in this program or in that other program. The own strategy turned into a program is nowhere to be seen. Britain, when after the war in November, it became the owner and was already deciding how to treat Denikin, to treat the rest. But what is the essential thing that happened? Since the beginning of 1919, the Ottoman Empire declared that we are pulling back our troops and leaving. Britain enters the territory, and the Ottoman Sultan is already thinking himself what to do. They turned to the Armenians and said, let's give you something on some territory of Western Armenia and autonomy on the territory of the Ottoman Empire. But in parallel with this, from the beginning of 1919, this already well-known story related to the Paris Conference began. It was the Paris Conference that was supposed to decide this so-called New Order during 1919 to 1920. And now Armenians are here with Britain. And the essential thing Britain did at that time is he appealed to the Ottomans to leave, carry out the order and leave the Kars region. They have not even obeyed, they even began to create some kind of administration. They created some kind of Islamic council. Until that, the Caucasian Islamic Army, and then entered Baku. But what was their mistake? A very essential thing that must be well understood. When they already saw that Britain was already demanding and pushing a lot, they turned to Denikin. Interesting, isn't it? They said, let's bring troops into Kars. We'll give it to you. We'll not give it up to the Armenians. This is where Britain gets furious and arrests the administration, which is called and forced to come out. And they clean all these Armenian territories. That allowed Armenia to already have several other beneficial conditions. Firstly, they are already thinking about the declaration of independence, that is, the proclamation of the country, because the good condition has already been created. Look what an interesting thing this is. Secondly, they should have already reconsidered their relations with Denikin's army, because the British looked at things differently. They carried out a very complicated policy, used it against the Bolsheviks, but Georgia and Azerbaijan, Armenia is also called to, were forced or even offered to come to some kind of unified agreement to fight against Denikin. In this complexity, Armenia has remained in the same chaos again. How will you go to war with Denikin when all hope is in him? Such a difficult situation. It simply had to cut ties. Well, the British probably gave some help, different ways, but one way or another, we have what we have. And they proclaimed the independence. And some Armenian territories were represented. Here are Armenian maps that you can look at. You're surprised. Here it is shown in different colors. See, Lori taken by Georgians. I don't know where it is, where it is not. Different ways on different maps. Amorphous thing, but proclaimed. This was a very significant circumstance for that time because many said that, okay, let's see who we'll deal with. At the same Paris conference, they didn't know how to go. Now, Eastern Armenia has sent a separate delegation. And this well-known delegation from Western Armenia, Nubar Pasha, has gone there. There, too, sitting and thinking in Paris, what should we do? How should we act? In the end, we came to some single thing from what the Armenians said we want, that much, and haven't received anything as if Armenians are new there. No one called Armenians, Georgians, or Tatars to this conference. Only recognized states were invited. However, they let others to come and speak out. Everyone said something different. At least they fulfilled the Treaty of Sever. This is also very important. They say what Britain has done or what they say in general. Where is this bluff from? However, it wasn't a bluff. After the liberation of Kars, he took Sultan and forced to sign the map. This is a reality that must be properly evaluated. Not to mention whether it was a lie, that you followed me, like you have something else here. You didn't always have anything. It was in these 1990s that you've not even noticed that the Kemal Atatürk movement was born. Many did not notice, but that the Armenians did not understand what was happening. It is already a deadly sin. What was there. Immediately, last time I indicated, at the meetings in July and August when Atatürk had already started his movement, after that in September in Sivas, they did it. A completely different story began here. In parallel, the Sever Agreement was being negotiated, and on August 10th, 1920, it was adopted. Before 1920, this movement took place. We've discussed it already. And this very movement made up a decision that there must be no Armenia. Western Armenia is already Turkey. They even introduced themselves as nationalists. There were Georgians at this meeting, Tatars, Bolsheviks as well. See how people are already thinking in the direction of this side. And they were already preparing seasons to find what they would do. They had that decision. And look, their first attempt to deal with Bolsheviks was at this meeting. In this direction itself, decisions in this eastern direction were removed. Armenia, in a slightly different way in the same summer of 1919, when this situation developed some wars anyway. Well, they freed the Nakhichevan as well and tried to create something there. There wasn't the wave, but in the end, already in 1920, this led to large protests. Why? Because on the one hand, the Bolsheviks were already winning, and there was already an opportunity for this new Turkish movement to turn to. On April 26th, when the Bolsheviks are already approaching Baku, on April 28th, they have already created republics. Having already received all their weapons, on the one hand, the Russian Denikin's army collapsed. The Bolsheviks from the west and north were already entering the territory of Armenia themselves. Nakhichevan, Zangezur, Karabakh were already in their hands for the summer, and the Lori from above. On the other hand, already a front was created between Armenians and Turks, Atatürk. What was it created for? They talk about the famous Armenian Turkish War of 1920, because when it was already signed that this territory of Armenia on the famous map of the Treaty of Sever belongs to the Armenians on September 24th. I don't know how people decided to enter the territory to take it. In a few days, the Turks received a reason. They have already destroyed it, already with the Bolsheviks. And on December 12th, the Alexanderpol Treaty is concluded in the amount of almost the same territory. This is an occupied region. This is Syunik. It's obvious, but this Syunik is already really given to the Bolsheviks. Here is the last important provision that the Armenians say they wanted more, but were given little. The Bolsheviks made Armenia right and left. What was the reality? The reality was that when the Bolsheviks enter Armenia, the Red Army, of course, they already have power. And many are already being told that the government that concluded the Alexanderpol Treaty no longer had the right. But it doesn't matter. What matters is that Bolsheviks, having already taken power, have already defined the border with Turkey. About 15,000 square kilometers. I don't know the exact size, but you can see it on this map with white, how they have doubled it. True, Nakhichevan, Karabakh, were given away. But you didn't have even so much either. So this is a very interesting moment when the role of the Bolsheviks constantly leads to disputes. It is clear that the Bolsheviks, in cooperation with Ataturk, are one of the conditions for destroying Armenia. We talked about it last time. But for what? So that they could come and become the owner and you would be happy to have so. That also happened. But let's agree, even this may not have been. That's interesting. Why did they go? I think they just restored the border of the empire, the pre-revolutionary border of the Russian Empire, from which Armenia got what it has for now. And the problem of Artsakh is controversial. That's what the story was like. I think it needs to be thoroughly studied, and to see, it's amazing to me, so much could have happened. When you look at the situation, when you look at how people conduct politics, constantly participating in its programs, never having their own program, a real program, because we see what a wonderful situation was developed in 1990. The British had enlarged your country twice, and even 3 times. There were issues that at this time should have allowed people to. And the most important thing is that we really could not have a political elite. That's important. Next time, we will talk about what the situation was like in the 90s, what processes were there, and how Armenian people and the elite behaved at that time. And we will see our main mistake that people identified this time and looked at the world through the eyes of 100 years. We must try to develop this reality to come to some conclusions later.